Caernarfon Castle is a medieval fortress in Caernarfon, Gwynedd, northwest Wales, cared for by CADW, the Welsh Government's Historic Environment Service. There was a motte and bailey castle in the town of Caernarfon from the late 11th century until 1283, when King Edward I of England began replacing it with the current stone structure. The Edwardian town and castle acted as the administrative centre of North Wales, and as a result the defences were built on a grand scale. There was a deliberate link with Caernarfon's Roman past, and the Roman fort of Saguntium is nearby. While the castle was under construction, town walls were built around Caernarfon. The work cost between £20,000 and £25,000 from the start until the end of work in 1330. Despite Caernarfon Castle's external appearance of being mostly complete, the interior buildings no longer survive, and many of the building plans were never finished. The town and castle were sacked in 1294 when Mad Dog ap Llywelyn led a rebellion against the English. Caernarfon was recaptured the following year. During the Glyndŵr Rising of 1400 to 1415, the castle was besieged. When the Tudor dynasty ascended to the English throne in 1485, tensions between the Welsh and English began to diminish, and castles were considered less important. As a result, Caernarfon Castle was allowed to fall into a state of disrepair. Despite its dilapidated condition, during the English Civil War Caernarfon Castle was held by Royalists, and was besieged 3 times by parliamentarian forces. This was the last time the castle was used in war. Caernarfon Castle was neglected until the 19th century, when the state funded repairs. In 1911, Caernarfon Castle was used for the investiture of the Prince of Wales, and again in 1969. It is part of the World Heritage Site, Castles and Town Walls of King Edward in Gwynedd. Background: the first fortifications at Caernarfon were built by the Romans. Their fort, which they named Saguntium, is on the outskirts of the modern town. The fort sat near the bank of the River Cyont. It is likely that the fort was positioned here due to the sheltered nature, and as traffic up the Cyont would have been able to supply Saguntium. Caernarfon derives its name from the Roman fortifications. In Welsh, the place was called Caernarfon, meaning the stronghold in the land over against Mon. Mon is the Welsh name for Anglesey. Little is known about the fate of Saguntium and its associated civilian settlement after the Romans departed from Britain in the early 5th century. Early castle. Following the Norman conquest of England, William the Conqueror turned his attention to Wales. According to the Domesday Survey of 1086, the Norman Robert of Rhuddlan was notionally in charge of the whole of northern Wales. He was killed by the Welsh in 1088. His cousin the Earl of Chester, Hugh Davran Chest, reasserted Norman control of North Wales by building 3 castles. One at an unknown location somewhere in Meirionydd, one at Aberyeiniog on Anglesey, and another at Caernarfon. This early castle was on a peninsula, bounded by the River Cyont, the Menai Strait. It would have been a motte and bailey, defended by a timber palisade and earthen banks. While the motte, or mound, was integrated into the later Edwardian castle, the location of the original bailey is uncertain, although it may have been to the northeast of the motte. Excavations on top of the motte in 1969 revealed no traces of medieval occupation, suggesting any evidence had been removed. It is likely that the motte was surmounted by a wooden tower known as a keep. The Welsh recaptured Gwynedd in 1115, and Caernarfon Castle came into the possession of the Welsh princes. From contemporary documents written at the castle, it is known that Llywelyn the Great and later Llywelyn ap Gruffydd occasionally stayed at Caernarfon. Edwardian Castle. War broke out again between England and Wales on the 22nd of March 1282. The Welsh leader, Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, died later that year on the 11th of December. His brother Dafydd ap Gruffydd continued to fight against the English, but in 1283 Edward I was victorious. Edward marched through northern Wales, capturing castles such as that at Dolwarth Ellen, and establishing his own at Conwy. War finally drew to a close in May 1283 when Dolbaddarn Castle, Daffod ap Gruffyd's last castle, was captured. Shortly after, Edward began building castles at Harlech and Caernarfon. The castles of Caernarfon, Conwy and Harlech were the most impressive of their time in Wales, and the construction, along with other Edwardian castles in the country, helped establish English rule. The master mason responsible for the design and orchestrating the construction of the castle was probably James of St. George, an experienced architect and military engineer who played an important role in building the Edwardian castles in Wales. According to the Flores Historiarum, during the construction of the castle and planned town, the body of the Roman Emperor Magnus Maximus was discovered at Caernarfon, and Edward I ordered his reburial in a local church. The construction of the new stone castle was part of a program of building which transformed Caernarfon. Town walls were added, connected to the castle, and a new quay was built. The earliest reference to building at Caernarfon dates from the 24th of June 1283, when a ditch had been dug separating the site of the castle from the town to the north. A bretegium, a type of stockade, was created around the site to protect it while the permanent defences were under construction. Timber was shipped from as far away as Liverpool. Stone was quarried from nearby places, such as from Anglesey and around the town. A force of hundreds worked on the excavation of the moat and digging the foundations for the castle. As the site expanded, it began to encroach on the town. Houses were cleared to allow the construction. Residents were not paid compensation until 3 years later. While the foundations for the stone walls were being created, timber-framed apartments were built for Edward I and Eleanor of Castile, his queen. They arrived at Caernarfon on either 11 or the 12th of July 1283 and stayed for over a month. Construction at Caernarfon Castle continued over the winter of 1283–1284. The extent of completion is uncertain, although architectural historian Arnold Taylor speculated that when Edward and Eleanor visited again in Easter 1284 the Eagle Tower may have been complete. The Statute of Rhuddlan, enacted on 3 March 1284, made Caernarfon a borough and the administrative centre of the county of Gwynedd. According to tradition, Edward II was born at Caernarfon on 25 April 1284. Edward was created Prince of Wales in 1301, with control over Wales and its incomes. Since then the title has traditionally been held by the eldest son of the monarch. According to a famous legend, the king had promised the Welsh that he would name a prince born in Wales, who did not speak a word of English, and then produced his infant son to their surprise, but the story may well be apocryphal, as it can only be traced to the 16th century. In 1284, Caernarfon was defended by a garrison of 40 men, more than the 30-strong garrisons at Conwy and Harlech. Even in peacetime, when most castles would have a guard of only a few men, Caernarfon was defended by between 20 and 40 people due to its importance. By 1285, Caernarfon's town walls were mostly complete. At the same time work continued on the castle. Spending on construction was negligible from 1289 and accounts end in 1292. Edward I's campaign of castle building in Wales cost £80,000 between 1277 and 1304, and £95,000 between 1277 and 1329. By 1292 £12,000 had been spent on the construction of Caernarfon's castle, of which the southern facade was furthest along, and town walls. As the southern wall and town walls completed a defensive circuit around Caernarfon, the plan was to build the castle's northern facade last. In 1294, Wales broke out in rebellion led by Mabdog ap Llywelyn, Prince of Wales. As Caernarfon was the centre of administration in Gwynedd and a symbol of English power, it was targeted by the Welsh. Mabdog's forces captured the town in September, and in the process heavily damaged the town walls. The castle was defended by just a ditch and a temporary barricade. It was quickly taken and anything flammable was set alight. Fire raged across Caernarfon, leaving destruction in its wake. In the summer of 1295, the English moved to retake Caernarfon. By November the same year, the English began refortifying the town. Rebuilding the town walls was a high priority, and £1,195 was spent on completing the job 2 months ahead of schedule. Attention then shifted to the castle and on finishing the work that had halted in 1292. Once the rebellion was put down, Edward began building Beaumaris Castle on the Isle of Anglesey. The work was overseen by James of St. George. As a result, Walter of Hereford took over as master mason for the new phase of construction. By the end of 1301, a further £4,500 had been spent on the work, with the focus of work on the northern wall and towers. The accounts between November 1301 and September 1304 are missing, possibly because there was a hiatus in work while Labour moved north to help out with England's war against Scotland. Records show that Walter of Hereford had left Caernarfon and was in Carlisle in October 1300. He remained occupied with the Scottish wars until the autumn of 1304, when building at Caernarfon resumed. Walter died in 1309 and his immediate subordinate, Henry of Ellerton, took over the position of master mason. Construction continued at a steady rate until 1330. To cause 100 suitable masons experienced in such work as the king is engaged upon at Caernarfon to be chosen in the town of Chester and in other parts within his bailiwick, and to cause them to come with their tools to Caernarfon without delay, there to do what Edmund the king's brother shall enjoin upon them. As the king needs masons for his work, there at once a letter to the Earl of Chester in 1295, asking him to urgently send masons to Caernarfon. From 1284 to 1330, when accounts send, between £20,000 and £25,000 was spent on Caernarfon's castle and town walls. Such a sum was enormous and dwarfed the spending on castles such as Dover and Chateau Gaillard, which were amongst the most expensive and impressive fortifications of the later 12th and early 13th centuries. Subsequent additions to Caernarfon were not major, and what remains of the castle is substantially from the Edwardian period. Despite the expense, much of what was planned for the castle was never carried out. The rears of the King's Gate and the Queen's Gate were left unfinished, and foundations in the castle's interior mark where buildings would have stood had work continued. Later history. For around 2 centuries after the conquest of Wales, the arrangements established by Edward I for the governance of the country remained in place. During this time the castle was constantly garrisoned, and Caernarfon was effectively the capital of North Wales. There was a degree of discrimination, with the most important administrative jobs in Wales usually closed to Welsh people. Tension between the Welsh and their English conqueror spilled over at the start of the 15th century with the outbreak of the Glyndŵr Rising. During the revolt, Caernarfon was one of the targets of Owain Glyndwr's army. The town and castle were besieged in 1401, and in November that year the Battle of Tut Hill took place nearby between Caernarfon's defenders and the besieging force. In 1403 and 1404, Caernarfon was besieged by Welsh troops with support from French forces. The garrison at the time was around 30. The ascension of the Tudor dynasty to the English throne in 1485 heralded a change in the way Wales was administered. The Tudors were Welsh in origin, and their rule eased hostilities between the Welsh and English. As a result, castles such as Caernarfon, which provided secure centres from which the country could be administered, became less important. In Caernarfon's case, the walls of the town and castle remained in good condition, while features which required maintenance, such as roofs, were in a state of decay and much timber was rotten. Conditions were so poor that of the castle's 7 towers and 2 gatehouses, only the Eagle Tower and the King's Gate had roofs by 1620. The domestic buildings inside the castle had been stripped of anything valuable, such as glass and iron. Despite the disrepair of the domestic buildings, the castle's defences were in a good enough state that during the English Civil War in the mid-17th century it was garrisoned by Royalists. Caernarfon Castle was besieged 3 times during the war. The constable was John Byron, 1st Baron Byron, who surrendered Caernarfon to Parliamentarian forces in 1646. It was the last time Caernarfon Castle saw fighting, although it was ordered in 1660 that the castle and town walls should be dismantled. The work was aborted early on and may never have started. Despite avoiding slighting, the castle was neglected until the late 19th century. From the 1870s onwards, the government funded repairs to Caernarfon Castle. The deputy constable, Llewellyn Turner, oversaw the work, in many cases controversially restoring and rebuilding the castle, rather than simply conserving the existing stonework. Steps, battlements, and roofs were repaired, and the moat to the north of the castle was cleared of post-medieval buildings that were considered to spoil the view, despite the protest of locals. Under the auspices of the Office of Works and its successors since 1908, the castle was preserved due to its historic significance. In 1911, Caernarfon was used for the investiture of the Prince of Wales for the first time when Prince Edward, eldest son of the newly crowned King George V. The ceremony was held there at the insistence of then Chancellor of the Exchequer David Lloyd George, a Welshman raised in Caernarfonshire. In 1969, the precedent was repeated with the investiture of Charles, Prince of Wales. Although Caernarfon Castle has been the property of the Crown since it was built, it is currently cared for by CADW, the Welsh Government's Historic Environment Division, responsible for the maintenance and care of Wales's historic buildings. In 1986, Caernarfon was added to the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites as part of the castles and town walls of King Edward in Gwynedd, in recognition of its global importance and to help conserve and protect the site. The castle houses the Royal Welsh Fusiliers Museum. During 2015 a new entrance pavilion was built, designed by architects Donald Insall Associates.